Hi, so today we're going to be talking about the structures of power under the Tudors. We started with Henry Tudor VII. He started August 22nd of 1485. He was the Earl of Richmond and killed King Richard III, and he then became Henry VII and crowned himself after he killed Richard III. He had a weak claim to the throne, and so he wanted to found a dynasty. He had 3 goals during his dynasty. 1, to hang on to it. 2, to assert his authority. And 3, to pass it on to his son, which would be Henry VIII. For power, he needed the capacity to secure compliance and obedience. For power, he included 4 different things, which was economic, ideological, political, and military, and all of these end up overlapping each other. He provided a forum for political competition, and that shaped the way that competition was conducted. England was already a monarchy, and it was established by medieval kings. So it was really easy for him to make sure that he had a ruling in a monarchy. Nobility was key for him, so people served him, but they could also oppose him, which gave people some type of power that he needed to listen to. He kept the peace and defended the realm, maintained law and administration of justice, and upholding the church. So all of these different things is what he needed to be able to do to keep his throne. The imperial crown is something that he wore, which was a closed crown which had a cross on the top. And that meant and symbolized that there was no authority above him, including God. He thought that he was equal to or above. The Pope and the King worked together, and the King ended up overseeing everything that the Pope was doing. Royal authority was supreme, so he was in charge of the Pope. So 1, the king takes advice and counsel, which was super important, and his council was made up of different important people throughout his town and of different knowledges, so he could take the best advice from well-known people in that area. 2, he was restrained by law and by common law, so he couldn't just do whatever he wanted to do. There was some type of structure around that was made by Parliament. Parliament represented commoners, and so they could do 2 things. 1, they could make new laws, and 2, they could grant taxes. So Parliament was made and represented of different people from the different realms, and they all came together biannually and 4 times. So quadrannually. They could make new laws that then had to go to the king that could be vetoed or approved, and that's why we have the word veto now. The king's money, he had to live of his own. So that meant he lived off the taxes of his people. So he could always raise taxes to further himself. Henry VII was young but also a workaholic in order to keep his throne, and he was approachable by people. He often let people come into his chambers and speak to him when they had issues or had ideas. But when he had his son, he was the exact opposite. because he didn't need to start that dynasty. He didn't need to have that approachability. The dynasty was already set by his dad, the Henry VII. So there was no standing army for the king. However, the army was relied on armed retainers, which was men bound to his loyalty. So they would need to sign contracts, and they would get land, or they would get certain hierarchy above everyone else. But when times came to it, they needed to serve the king in war or be a force. So farmers and men that the king signed contracts with needed to carry armory and horses on their property and be ready in case of war. If men didn't keep their contract, they would lose land and have to pay a hefty fine because they already agreed to, they had that hierarchy, or they had that land, or they had that wealth from the king in order to serve him whenever he needed. Not being able to control his sectors, his different areas, meant being overthrown and could cause civil wars, like the War of the Roses. There was 4 ways to control people under Henry VIII, starting from his first to the last case scenario. Number 1 was propaganda. Royal portraits started here, and Henry VIII was often portrayed as larger than life in order to represent dominance over his viewers. Number 2, patronage. Loyalty and trusted men get more power and to further order to the crown. So, yeah. Number 3, consultation. Connection to the king was key. So, in order to do that, the central people can whisper in his ear, and it was important to be close to the king, to even be like in charge of his chambers or in charge of his pot to go to the bathroom. It was a big key person in that life because he could whisper to the king whenever he needed to. And 4 was coercion, which was heavy lordship and acts of attainder, which was declaring people guilty of treason, and rebels needed to pay heavy fines, and you could only be loyal to the king. Like, that's it. And a threat to the king meant death. So this is where he got to control how many wives he had. Henry VIII ended up having 6 wives, and he could go to the court and say, nope, she's unfit and I need a new one. She's not providing me a son, so I get a new one. Henry VIII changed the date of him being crowned the day before. So when people were fighting for the other side or not fighting for him, he could take away those powers that they already had, even though he wasn't king yet. And many people wrote about them historically, including Shakespeare. All done.